So I have my mechanical pencil with HB lead. I have a watercolor pencil. You could also use water-soluble graphite. And I also will be using ink pens. And just like that, the microns or any other type of fountain pen with water-soluble or permanent ink will come in handy. So what I want to do first is this. By the way, I also want to mention that I will have one of these brushes for some washes that I will be making. So having water, and I'll also be using a little small watercolor, portable watercolor kit that may touch some tone and some color into that layer that I want to set up. But first, what I want to show you is this. I'm going to be using my graphite pencil. And I want you to maybe just, this is sketch paper. I'm going to be working on Bristol paper for the later exercise. But what I want you to do first is think of the size of your thumb. Don't make these too big. It's a great exercise, but what I want you to think about is this. And hopefully you could see it close. If not, we'll be using this camera a lot today. Which is, let's just draw a little circle. A circle, or it could be an egg. And I want to take this circle and I want to say, well, my light source is coming from right over here, which means the terminator will be right here. Now, the kind of line that I draw here is going to develop the illusion of the volume because I'm going to work light and shadow. So notice that the straight line, which would work fine, it'll take a little bit of work. I could actually curve it right at the edge and give a little bit of curve. So we're thinking, think of the moon. And we're thinking one of the phases of the moon where we have a division between the light and the shadow. Now the type of lines, let me go ahead and erase that line that I made there earlier. The type of line that I can use here is any type of line, really. We go from straight line, cross hatch, scumbling, stippling. We could just do a wash if I were working with watercolor pencil here. But what I want you to focus on is, let's follow the contour line. So I'm going to create lines. And it takes a little bit of putting yourself in the position of a three-dimensional object to follow the contour. Notice that I'm trying to curve it more right at the edge and follow the roundness. And now that roundness that is nearing, let's call it the pole or the opposite. And I took my time with this, taking my time so these line patterns can actually be layered. Now I could go over it and add just a little bit of hatch, and it's almost just a layered right over saturated line that will also get lighter, and that is by using maybe a lighter pencil or less pressure, which is what I'm doing here, and also less space. More space between the lines, creating just the gradual. And in the end, I can actually come all the way to the top where we have our eventual circle there. Now this plus a cast shadow, and I could just do that with sort of a filler shape of darker graphite. Just like that. Actually begins to create that illusion. Now we could really polish this up. But what I wanted to do is this. On a piece of sketch paper here, I'm going to create a second one. Again, we don't want to spend too much time with this. Just think of the material that you'll be using. So I'm going to start with the graphite. Let's move this right over here. So just the circle once again. And let me go to the watercolor pencil. So thinking about that, once again, my light source is right here. And what I want to do is not just a sphere or a ball or a moon, but I want a hairy element of texture to this. So one of the keys that I will point to is look at the images on the screen. You have a sharp line, sharp rendering of the image, and below it I added a blur where you can actually read light and shadow, and you can kind of see the volume. So what I'm going to be thinking about is that. I'm going to be thinking, well, here's my light, here's my shadow, and maybe there's a little bit of lump or pattern. So these lines won't matter as much. I'm just going to add a little bit of material to it, and I'll add just a little bit of water to create that wash. And the plan is to use this as a first layer. So we'll wait just a second while it dries. But already it works. Managing the technique on how I can create the value changes is going to be key. I'm going to tap this really quick with a paper towel so I can speed up the drying process, because you really want this to be fully dry. And now, while I wait this to fully dry, I can actually work on a second version. And I'll do that with, if you were to work with a Micron or ink pen, let's put it here over by this side. Let's create a smaller, even smaller version of this. So I'm going to want to test. There's just a nice little circle. And I'm going to show you, let's move it right over here, a different version of line. So we always talk about line. Line is just a segment that has length. It obviously has direction. It has possibilities of a shape, and obviously the combination of patterns of that shape. It has speed, so it could be really slow or it could be fast. It has pressure, so it could be really light pressure or it could be heavy pressure. All of these combinations, mostly focusing on the direction and the curve or the shape and managing the pace, is what I want to do. So first I'll use a few of these lines, and here I will probably be looking at inspiration from the mouse that we have on screen, where I will take some of these lines, and what I want to do is begin to shape them. So following some of the roundness of my sphere or my ball, I'm going to curve the little line, and I want to begin to add a little bit of pattern. So think of the way hair grows and try to follow that, and managing the saturation of line, the shape of it, the length of it, and in this case, kind of the conversion, the converging of some of these lines, of some of these patterns, how they come together, how they maybe overlap. You'll begin to get a sense of, okay, am I using the right gauge of pen for this type of line here? Should I work on the pattern first all the way across and then maybe taper it down, layer it down? Could I use maybe a first layer of full coverage with sort of a hatch, just like I did here, and then layer clearer, sharper shapes of fur, and get a sensation of movement, even of shininess, of luster, of texture, of wind, on the fur maybe. All these variations. And also managing how I deal with the edge. So that original circle that I had, look at me going outside of the edge here. Now it's getting fuzzy. So the fuzziness, the static, all the different things. Or the wetness. What if it's wet fur? How do you deal with that? So it's taking a look at some of those smaller shapes, but the main components is going to be line, shape, direction, pace, speed, saturation, gauge, value, all the beautiful variations, combinations that you can come up with. Some of these lines may break into, because of how we deal with light, and I don't want to switch, I should, to a smaller pen really quick, where you will see the shift in the weight of the line, but they could also break into dash dot. So more of a dotted, just like you see here, sensation that still gives the impression of hair or fur and how it behaves according to the light. But if you have those few things in mind, you will, no matter who you are, you will enter the zone, the flow. When you're thinking about the shape of these lines and the pace of these lines and the shape of the full object, the idea is for this to get really meditative. So there we have a fuzzy ball. I could rearrange, there's a little bit of spiraling in the center there. Let's see what it will look like. So this one's with ink, the Micron pen. And just so you know, this was a 05 mostly. For this one, I'm going to stick with, so we did the wash, added a little bit of water, and this is just the same watercolor pencil. Let's go ahead and add some of these longer, wavier. So I'm going to use a little bit of longer, wavier. Going by what I see on the mouse, saturating, giving it a little bit of shape or muscle underneath, layering some of this line, following a bit of pattern on it. And then you begin to see how you could use the layered wash underneath, plus some of the line as mixed media. And in this case, it wouldn't be mixed media. It's just the same medium, but with the variation. First in wash, layered wash, and then with sharper line. The one thing I find most of the time is the patience to stop and actually reach your hand out and feel the fur before you draw the line. One thing is the direction of that fur. The other thing is the light and how it changes as you combine any of these patterns. And I used most of the same source of light. All three were, kind of like our mouse today. And then you will discover a sensation of, oh, this is it. The pattern with the focus on direction, pace, and pressure that will give you a new technique for drawing fur. So there we have it. Just ink. This is watercolor wash with the same watercolor pencil layered line. And this was just graphite as the first quick sketch. One last thing. If you're looking at the tail, for example, areas of the head or the little paws there. But there's one here that I want to show you, and that would be the tail. So for the tail, one thing that I want you to focus on is think of it as a cylinder. And you're going to find, this is another way, you're going to find the lines that are inner contour lines. And this would be kind of like a cross section here, where I just show you the one of the ends, not necessarily for this drawing, but the focus is on how do I manage these inner contour lines. And the contour, we generally speak about the silhouette, the outer edge. These inner contour lines that shape, that give you that sensation of what direction three-dimensionally this is taking and how it just curves in space, basically. Had a little hiccup right here. So that it would be the focus for today. And as a quick sketch, you could see how any of these would work. I think I'm going to go for this one. And my goal was to hopefully take my paper now and work maybe on, I know it's a lot of work, and depending on how patient, how big, I'm going to try to squeeze in 2 drawings here where I could maybe try out 2 different techniques, 2 different mediums. So for the first one, let's look at drawing. I'm going to start with graphite. I'm going to start here at the top, where this is going to be more of a gestural drawing. I don't want to build too much of the drawing structure, the drawing techniques, where you still look at envelopes. In this case, I'm going to go more with contour drawing and negative space somewhat. I'm also looking at the volume. So I'm going to start with the small oval, kind of round or oval, and finding the axis. So seeing some of those inner shapes. And hopefully you could see some of these lines. I'm making them very, very light. In order for me to capture some of these ovals, some of these elements, I want to really focus on proportion mostly. So some of these might be getting a little too big. All of them thinking in terms of egg, oval, circle. And this one could be just a nice little 2-section ball here. With just a little bit of an angle or an axis, which tends to go down in this direction. And since I'm using light lines of graphite, here I can actually give myself some clue of that line pattern, that line direction that could serve as I later deal with smaller patterns. Let's get into this smaller shape here. And I'm just going to, again, think of a cylinder. More ovals for the little paws here. And then connect first with the line, and then making it 3-dimensional with that little tail. So here I'll look more at negative space between the body and the tail first. We have a beautiful shape there. And then I'll think about the thickness of it as well. And it begins to really come together including what I was talking about earlier, that contour line, which if you look at the reference, it's pretty much answered for you. There we have it. Maybe it's a little rounder than the actual image. So then the decision is, so I have my graphite lines. And what I plan to do is, I really want to get these two in so you could see the difference. So I'm just going to kind of replicate the drawing method here. Make this one a little bit closer to this edge. Maybe you can start with a hole. Bulkier. Overall size, proportion. That we could then break down into smaller pieces in relationship to the bigger. Overall, the body, the shape of it, the size of it. And using these smaller, simpler shapes also really let you break it down into segments that could be easier to work. So you could see a lot of circles happening here and no contour edges. I don't want sharp lines like a cutout that I'll have to deal with as I deal with that edge when I deliver the lines for the fur. And this one should be fun, should be looser with the line. The level of accuracy hopefully will be emphasized in the light and patterns of the quality of the lines that you will be delivering. So all those beautiful, slow, patient, rendered patterns. I'm beginning to break some of the inner areas of, you see lumps that follow the direction of some of this hair, and then they get shallower, or in some areas flatter, or they curve in and under. So I want to break that down just a little bit more here. And once again, our tail, mostly just focused on negative space. Looking at the negative space between the tail and the body pretty much sets it up for me. And with that, we are ready to get meditating, because it is really a meditation in line delivery. So for these, and going to the first one here, I'm going to try to give you a closer look. So this is the top version. And for this one, I'm going to use that wash. So really highly recommend looking at the lower version that you have on screen, where you blur. And what I am actually asking you to do is squint. So the image, and I'm talking about this one here, this image, I'm forcing you to squint. You're really seeing light and shadow patterns, as you should be focusing on them, and delivering maybe a little bit more material in those areas. No details. I mentioned I haven't worked the edges because I could actually come back and deliver that line pattern with the edge. Some of them you may want to just hint at. For example, these facial features here, but it all turns into light and shadow, into edge and patterns. So the first thing I want to do is really identify what is the darkest area. So I see a little bit of dark right here. I see a little bit of dark right here. And what I'm trying to do is capture a layer of wash. And there's areas of gray as well. So I don't want to just capture the shadows. There's a big one right here. So this may be a little trickier. You want to focus on the shape, the edge of what will be the ear, and somewhat, never forget, even when you're delivering washes, you want to make sure you're following the direction. In this case, notice that there's a little bit of that curve starting to pop up. That bit of curve on the top of the body. Let me go ahead and test this before I get too far, just to get an idea how I'm going to be able to manage these washes and what it will do for the paper that I'm using. So, oh yes, I love it. And I want to extend some of this wash. So I'm beginning to see that I could add a little bit more. And this, how dark it's going to be if I need. And how much water will I need as well? Not being able to add line with that wet wash it's kind of a negative. So you want to really time it. Make sure you get it all with a good strategy. I'm going to be adding a facial feature here because, again, it stands out. So this big circle we have for the eye. And I'm going to make it just a little more interesting than just a black little black ball with the nice highlight. I want to add a little bit of extra interest, like maybe the idea to see a pupil in there and a little bit of the brow right above. Again, I'm only thinking in terms of washes here. And some of this line, it can begin to get a little bit grayer. Just a little bit grayer. Notice those early circles, the ovals that I delivered for the drawing are really beginning to pay off. And just like I said, you can follow the edge as we did with those early sketches, turning a circle into a sphere. Here, I'll just follow some of these edges and follow along because I can actually see the shape. Don't want to get too carried away. And here, again, looking at that image where all you see is light and shadow. And yes, there's a lot of beautiful gray. But it may not be the best solution to deal with that level of gray in the wash at this stage. You're going to be able to build it up with line. And let's go ahead and add a little more water. So also the brush you use for this, the size of the brush. What if, can I use wet on wet techniques? Well, it depends on several things. The type of line, the type of material, the type of brush, obviously the type of paper. I'm adding just the first layer. Notice that it's not full black, but just spreading some of the wash from black into gray and kind of enhancing the illusion of roundness, of light. My focus is value and direction in order to capture shape. And yes, this could be, I may be rushing it just a little bit because this could be done in such a precise pattern of building up section through section. All the little lumps begin to show up even. The more I add value to some of these, the more everything else, where, especially if I leave it in light, it feels like it would need the same level of attention, the same touch. But we will, again, with discipline, with the strategy, take our time, do it slowly. Already, I'm loving this. Don't know how much line I'm going to be needing, really. It looks rich already, and the quality of the brush and the washes. Something where you could literally go back and forth, adding more, just a little bit of line, and then washing that. One of my favorite techniques with mixed media is to be able to combine quality of line and whether it's color. Obviously, we're dealing with value. The perfect balance between those. Just a sliver of value here. So all the different materials and the qualities that they could give you. Me using this watercolor pencil and this specific one, which is a Faber-Castell, gives you this nice, rich black, and how I can extend it to different levels of gray. On this paper, it's something you should really consider. Testing different mediums, different brands of different mediums on different papers with different techniques until you find that one that is you. And it takes that mad scientist approach, willing to risk disaster in order to find a eureka, a new way. It's curiosity, really. And I think a big factor of mastery is how curious you are to try. It's risk-reward. We've said this all along. Depending on how much risk you're willing to take, the reward So here we are, getting more and more focused on smaller and smaller. And yes, a lot of it is going to be detail. But the way you deal with the detail, it also shows you could do a lot of beautiful, what looks like detail through technique, through one swoosh, very masterful brushstroke. Lots could be richer even than what you could do by overworking. So here we are. This is stage 1. really wanting to push this too far into the gray. Beautiful areas of simple patterns, it looks like. A lot of the work is going to be enriched and more detailed with a very sharp tool. It's time for me to maybe sharpen my tool again as you begin to lose that quality, that sharpness that you need. Very important. I haven't mentioned this, but if you were working with, let's say, graphite or colored pencils, there's another tool of mixed media, and as far as your technique goes, which would be bringing an eraser. And a lot of this could be laid down and then erased. Well, obviously with this type of wash, it isn't. It's a wet approach. But with other types of, especially graphite or charcoal, you could use the subtractive method to draw your light in. So I'm going with this lightest area where I see most of kind of the volume feel, the volume resolution to this image, the bulk of it right in there. And to keep it simple, you want to simplify your line wash approach, your values. If anything, your values, no, everything, actually, everything is always best to keep it with a simple or simplified mindset. It's the combination of the thing that actually enriches it. So some of these things actually are going to have to be just a little bit darker. As some of my lighter areas become gray, I'll know how much more I need to go back and darken some of these shadow areas. And I could do that with line. I don't have to do it with these washes. But I do want some of these washes to almost have it done. Almost be able to, yep, doesn't even need a line. It's delivered. I am adding a little bit of edge here, just so I can capture some of the shadow and some of the gray areas around. Uh-oh. Make sure you follow that direction always. And then help us build this inner shape of the ear, where we see some little bit of, just a bit of different texture. And as I said, not much more needed. If you can get away with that in the setup, in the first layer section, where you're happy, well, that's a good job. So I'm looking at this guy. He's starting to look like a rabbit. Maybe I made this a little too large. So there we have it. Quick look at how that's looking. I'm going to have to go grab some cheese for this guy. Looking good. So this I'm supposed to let dry. It's drying really fast. Just wanted to show you a quick glimpse from the different view. But we could actually go right into lines. So my idea is not necessarily mixed media. I could actually add graphite lines, make this mixed media, and maybe I could test some of these gray areas with lighter HB pencil. And guess what? It's going to affect, because where I lay graphite, some of this watercolor pencil, there's a waxiness, oily, where mixed mediums won't work well, or sometimes they'll do incredible things that you have to be aware of. So sometimes certain graphites and certain color pencils won't really work well when layered or put together. They won't blend. So keep that in mind if you're planning to come back. So this graphite is looking beautiful over these layers. And it actually, because it's a mechanical pencil, it will deliver some of these beautiful tapered fine lines. Maybe even better than what I was planning with the watercolor pencil. Now, you may want to consider variations of graphite. So starting with an HB, 2B, 4B, 6B, 8B. How far with the level of darkness you're going to need, and strategize for that as well. So I'm trying to go really slow so you could see the curving and the segmenting as I also consider the value. And I am looking really, really close at the reference to make sense of what's going on with that hair, with that fur as it curves. And then trying to simplify that. Let me add some graphite in here so it becomes more drawing and shifts a little bit the texture. So the one thing is the layer that I set previously, it looks really fine-tuned to this light gray. And I'm starting to question, how is that going to work? Is it going to get really bland all the way through? As I'm focusing too much on this front area here, coming together with a little bit of longer lines. And what I see in this illustration is there may have been some white, very, very thin white acrylic or gouache added after the fact, because it's not erased. There definitely looks like there was wet media and line delivered in somewhat the same way I'm working it. But a final touch here, you could see some white streaks. It's not eraser. It looks like a fine brush just laid a couple of white strokes, especially right here, and definitely in here. Some of these beautiful little lines that go just outside the edge. It really gives that character, that personality, and it really places the subject in space, in three-dimensional space. So any curve, tilt, or roundness that adds, like say down here at the neck, the head-neck connection, anything that adds to the position in space will also give it character. It'll give it a pose. I'm using little tapered lines in patterns, and gotta be honest, lucked out going with this mix of the wash and the graphite line, because it's really looking rich, and it has that light quality that I was hoping for. I will have to add, and it's risky because some of these lines using the same pencil, and I'm talking about HB, could get overworked is definitely what I want to say. So you have to be extra careful, or plan better. Really strategize what it is you're going for. So I see something here, and this might take us into a new realm, but I do see a little bit of color right at the tip of the nose. So I'm going to use a little bit of yellow ochre. So I'm using this watercolor travel kit here, a little bit of yellow ochre, and I used a little bit of cam red just to get a pinkish hue to that. And I want this ultra light. I don't want this, so I'm going to tap it a few times on my paper towel, and I want this really light because there's just that touch of color right under the nose. And it actually goes just off to the side here. And I think that'll do it. You can see it from here. So I just touched a tiny bit of color right there. And you may also pick up some type of color right at the edge of the ears. So this is just a dirty brush now. Barely any color on it. And my focus was right there. Because you'll see the combination of that tiny bit of color. And when it dries, I don't want to go near it yet because it's still wet. But when it dries and I add the lines, that will work beautifully. So I'm going back to the watercolor pencil and adding some of these lines over the washes where I feel the pencil will not do as well. Working some of these lines over the pencil as well. Just layering a third layer now with very careful and essential type lines. You could almost count them. It's a 1, 2, 3 type of deal here. Just a few strokes to really enhance that light on the fur. And here we go. We're going to go right into this little nose. And there's a nice little dark. With a little bit of edge. And there's a tiny bit of texture on it, so I'll come back with a little bit of wash over the touch of color. And we do have a lot of these. Maybe you want to save for last, but I just want to see what some of these will look like with this medium. What you're seeing here is just an extension of these lines, maybe a little too thick. So I'm going to save, yeah, it's going to go back to pencil for those. But what I will add is some of these little bumps. And before I move forward, I'm going to add a little extra contrast as I planned earlier. Just add a little more material. And then wash it to the outer edge, just giving the eye a little more realism, a little more glare, a little more light, a little more value play, where you can actually see just a glimmer underneath and kind of a little bit of a better read. Okay, so I'm beginning to really play with variations here with that pencil, going back to the watercolor pencil. Really being careful. Remind yourself to look at your subject. Look, it's not just the mouse, it's the section, and abstract it. Really focus on the section, the area, and break it down even further to the direction, the line, the light, and even further. Just a quick gesture, pattern. And the best, and pretty sure the only way you can really, really do this is by looking closely. It's not looking. I shouldn't say looking. It's seeing. You need to see it. And what is it? Well, you're going to show us later, because we all look at it, but when we see it, we all see different things. So how you see it and how you translate it, that's what matters. So the more you look at it, the better chance you have of seeing it. Some of these lines will get looser as we begin to get more gestural, and some of these areas that are a little bit bigger, but you don't want it to get monotonous or automatic. You want to take your time with some of these combinations where the lines meet, because it does affect the overall look. But we're nearing that place where, notice how I'm going just off the edge, still with the watercolor pencil, anticipating going back with just a few lines of graphite that are fine and thin and go outside the edge, as you can see them here, especially here in the back. There's beautiful patterns of line and these little lumps in this area of the body, and you could see some of these lines get longer and they kind of curve down and they have this roundness to them. Try your hardest to blind draw it, to really just keep your eyes on the subject and feel the line. I'm going to wash just a little bit. I haven't really been involved with the little feet. So we're going to bring some of this gray right into it, and not a lot of detail. Just a few lines, and yes, we have some of that light, and we have sharp claws. So maybe making a decision here. Should I use the thicker or thinner and just a little bit heavier, the graphite line? I will do that. Just a couple with watercolor pencil, and I'll play with the others. So there's a variation with the graphite lines. That's definitely my solution. Playing a little bit with the variation in pressure and feeling, just adding a thin, light layer of line over that wash. You see it actually broken into very spaced lines, right, especially right over here before it turns again. And then they kind of cross-hatch with a little bit of curve. And just like I said, the more you look at it, and the more you begin to develop from one section to the next, the easier you begin to see how it all works out. Let me go into the tail here. So these lines look pretty simple. Pay attention to that curve. There's sort of an underside to the tail, and you got a little bit of shadow there. A lot of the lines are coming off the edge, and they kind of clump up, creating these little sharp clusters here with the point. And then just a thin line to guide me right through the edge. A little bit, just a tiny bit of sharpness in some of it. Coming right to the edge. The body following the form. And what you will see is the pattern of those contour lines, inner contour lines that will deliver. So there we are. We have the general shape. And now you could wash a little bit of this before you do those lines. Don't rush through this. You want to really pay attention to the direction of these curved little lines here. And the ideal way is to visualize. Visualize and just feel your pencil going over the actual three-dimensional form. It's the best way you can deliver that quality of line. You want to do it slow. The more you rush it, the more you can lose the connection, the feel to the actual physicality. So my best tip would be pretend you're really actually drawing these type of lines on the mouse tail. Feel how that pencil would curve and in which direction as you follow the shape, the inner contour, that line. Notice here I went from this C shape to now almost this C shape. So somewhere along the line there's one of these that became more parallel. And there we have it. I think I should be very happy with that. Let's take one more look from over here. Okay, this guy's ready to run out of here. tiny little touch of color. Beautiful, beautiful. And what I think my solution to the eye, just a little bit, makes me happy. A few more things. I would actually add more of that graphite, especially here at the edges. We got to deal with some of these lines here. So here, direction and pace. Let me move this just a little bit this way, because you got to see that, you know, you could do it slow, or you could swoosh it. And what does the swoosh give you in terms of quality? Is it actually something you want to consider, or do you go, are you better off slowing your line down? Rehearse your line, and then deliver it. That's another option. Different caliber of lines. And off the edge here, just adding finishing touches. Some of these graphite lines that I'm going to add here, they really just create shapes of value. You should not think of these as detail. The moment you try to detail something, take it beyond the simplicity of a line to a shape and the value of it, that could be the moment you begin to lose it. So how you think of detail, you could deliver it with technique, most likely. Just a quick swoosh, and you got it. Okay, and I really got carried away with this one. There we have it. Now, one extra would be to add shadows underneath, and that would place it on a surface maybe, and that would add another layer of realism to it. But I'm going to go ahead and move to this bottom one here. And I just want to wonder now, the way it worked with, let's go ahead and place this here. With the washes, I loved it. So I'm going to do same thing. I love the washes, but then I'm going to use ink lines. So ink lines are going to be heavier. They're going to be a little bit harder to manage value with. It could be really interesting. So I could actually use, let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to use ink washes. This is my water-soluble ink pen. And then I'll use ink lines over those ink washes. See if that works. Remember, you're experimenting. So the first thing I want to do is I want to test how this ink on this paper. And I want to start slow. Sometimes you don't want to start with the line. Sometimes you may want to start with just a few dots. But those ink lines, I mean, drawing with ink pens, it is so precise. It is so automatically sharp. So there's a few dots, just tiny lines. And notice the difference between the wash that was delivered earlier with the watercolor pencil and now this one here. It is heavy. It dries a little bit different as well. So I guess we're going to have a gray mouse and then a black mouse. Maybe. And then obviously the amount of water and how I'm going to deliver it. But it's a beautiful technique. So I'm going, again, based on the way I set up my line, my simple shapes. I'm going to squint. I'm going to take a look at some of these dark. And thinking of the saturation and the heaviness of some of these lines, I want to make sure I don't get too dark, too carried away. Let's go ahead and add the feature here. Slowly, I'm going to paste this to see if I'm capturing a good sense of the shifting values. This is a key feature here to allow me, because it will be darker, and I'm going to go with just full dark from the get-go. Using the brush and the technique to maybe create something I've never seen before with the way it washes with this type of ink on this paper and also with this brush. Pulling some material from heavier washes and then dragging it and shaping it. It's really important to really begin to know your pencil to the point where you'll give it a name. And different pencils have different, they do different things. They have different, call it personalities to deliver you different qualities, and different brushes, same thing. Getting really, really familiar with all your materials so your technique is not improvised. Always looking at enhancing. So this brush, I know somewhat what it could do, but I don't know too much of with this ink on this paper. So getting to know the medium, the surface, and what and how you can push that technique. Everything always helping you achieve better results, or just more fun. So notice how I'm dragging the wash just a little bit heavier in some areas than I wish, but trying to manage that. And dragging, trying to manage also the level of water that I want to use. Maybe thin it out just a little bit. Let's go to some other darker areas. Doesn't really work while it's wet, so Some of these could be patchy. I don't want that. So I'm trying to keep these lines. I'm making them fast so they're not loaded. The slower I move my pen, the more ink it's going to drop on the paper, the heavier the wash is going to be. So I'm beginning to just let it dance. Following sort of a blind drawing here. Hopefully catching just a little smudge there. What I can then use. Okay, again, maybe a little too heavy here. And then bring in the water. Start with some of the darker areas. Look at that. That I'm going to leave alone. That's what I mean by surprising technique. And what that did is the paper just gave me that. The combination of ink lines, that type of ink, and the brushstroke that I decided to use with the amount of water that I brought in. You want to leave that alone. When you get stuff like this, that's automatic technique, automatic delivery of textures that are hard to come by unless you really practice them. I'm going to go outside of this and just push some of this gray into what will be the tail. And those little paws here. So maybe it's a little heavy. You could do a little lifting as well. All the different watercolor variation techniques. And we'll definitely have to wait just a little to let this dry. But here's a look from above. So refined. And this was just a splash of water on what that ink did with the paper. And a closer look really reveals some of the things that they just don't happen unless you practice them. And even when you practice, there's still that always surprise you factor. There we are. So for this to dry, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to color. I'm going to use the same, maybe let's use a little pinker. So I'm going to go with a little bit of alizarin crimson. Really water it down. Just using a little more pink this time on that nose. And I'm going to bring that pink just a little bit into this ear here. Maybe just a touch on the tail as well. So we have a touch of pink on the nose, touch of pink on the ear, and that just dragged on an area of the tail. Some of these things I just want to leave completely alone. So we move away from my water-soluble pen, and I'm going to go to microns. Go to some of the small. Start with the smallest. So for this one, I'll go with a 0.1 to start. Absolutely have to be fully dry. You want that dry. I want to show you a few more images that I prepared. When we begin to use some of that So this is a close-up, so you could see that direction of the line. You can actually see the curves and the lumps on the cheek, on the forehead, on the nose, in and around the eye. So some of these lines and the way you deliver, the way you pattern these lines, I want to use a little more gesture, a little more looseness, a little more free flowing. So notice my grip. I'm grabbing it all the way at the end with the overhand grip, which is not regularly used for ink pens, but I'm bringing in a little bit of that looseness of what would be charcoal or graphite type of stroke to this ink pen, and do a little bit more blind drawing. Now this type of blind drawing, when I'm in areas like this, I'm going to say it's about 90 to 95% blind drawing. I get a feel, but I take a quick glance down to make sure I'm in the proper area and I'm following. And with ink, sometimes you lose. You don't know if the ink pen is delivering the kind of line. So you have to keep an eye on it so you're not just motioning, wasting time. But don't glue your eyes to your paper. Remember, the more you look, the better chance you have to see. And the things that you need to see, right here, patterns and direction, value, really extending the line to cover bigger areas, adding tons to that early layer. Love how they're working together with these smaller, lighter lines. And remember, your lines, how you decide to deliver them, the amount of variations that you can do, even if it's just graphite, you should be having fun. And in that, what they call the flow, also known as the right here, right now, where you really get immersed. And I said it earlier, meditative, very meditative. The ultimate is you become the mouse. You really, really connect with it in a way where you're almost feeling every caress of the pen, every stroke. Completely intuitive. And in a way, losing track of, it almost feels like it's not even me doing this. The decision making is just 100% automatic, but in control. Sometimes anticipated, like a vision. You could see it before it happens. Play with variations of line. Play with exploring. Let your curiosity, what would happen if, as long as you maintain a good control of an idea of what you're trying to achieve with the test, just like I did here. Let's see what happens. And actually paid off. It couldn't have. It could have been, whoop, no, that's not going to. And somehow your creativity, your curiosity to bring that and maybe make something that you would have never thought come alive is a better feeling than just, making it photographic, which is just a matter of technique. Really take your technique to the next level, but it's the creativity you're willing to bring that I feel matters. And it's generally based on what you're willing to explore, the permission you give, how much permission you're giving yourself to take risk. So a lot of line work right now. We have some of these beautiful washes that I really don't want to interfere with too much. They're there. I'm just enhancing a few lines, some few clumps of patterns and shifting value to add just a tiny bit of what looks like detail, but it's anything but. Don't let yourself get too mechanical, where you're just zigzagging to fill in. There's a way that you can break it down like this. Your curiosity is going to somehow take you to a place where you're going to develop a passion about it. And with that passion, then the next stage would be purpose. It feels like, oh wow, yes, there's a purpose to this, which feels even better. And that takes you to mastery. When you have a sense of it's still somewhat automatic, but you're pushing it a little beyond all the way along. It's fun. You're having fun with it. Whether it's the fun of discovering something new that you didn't know could be done that way, or seeing something you've looked at a million times, but seeing it entirely fresh, understanding it. So far, I've only used one type of pen, the 0, 1. Following, understanding how and what matters about every single line you decide to apply. Oops, I kind of lost it here. Let's try to get it back. Connection broke down there for a second. And I know why. It's could have been rushing it just a little bit. Let's see if I have a feeling that these would work. Four. Nice, beautiful little whiskers there. With the nice, beautiful automatic tapering of the line as well. But here's where you really get a good sense of why pace and why it all matters. Not just the shape, but the gauge and the type of line that you decide to deliver. And how you choose to deliver it. Switched over to a 0.3 just to add a little bit of variation to the line, a little heavier in terms of gauge. So it matches this dark area of wash. And just giving it a touch of gesture. As we come to a conclusion here with this one. And I did have one last image here to show you the final close-up with the layering. And when you can almost forget that it's a mouse and see the abstract qualities of just lines, shapes, value, and how you can piece them all and bring yourself to see it that way, where the gesture of it and the understanding of it makes it look easy. Just like the one you see on screen here. So a beautiful exercise. And there we have it. We'll call it City Mouse, Country Mouse here. I hope you guys enjoyed it.